A broken statue held a secret that rewrote history. Deep inside its cracked stone, archaeologists found a hidden map to an engineering marvel, a water system that saved a kingdom from total collapse. By the end of this story, you will understand how ancient ingenuity triumphed over a catastrophic drought. We will follow the trail of clues from a museum artifact to a lost network of tunnels, revealing how a civilization used gravity and stone to cheat its own extinction. How much of our own survival might depend on wisdom we have already forgotten for generations? This kingdom was the envy of the ancient world, a gleaming jewel cradled by lush, green valleys. Its wealth flowed from the land itself, from rivers that fed vast fields of grain and orchards heavy with fruit. Trade caravans arrived daily, their carts laden with goods, a testament to the kingdom's power and stability. But then the rain stopped, not for a season but for years. The mighty rivers that were the kingdom's lifeblood shrank to pathetic trickles, and then to dusty, cracked riverbeds. The fertile soil, once dark and rich, became a pale, brittle crust under a relentless sun. The granaries, once overflowing, began to empty. How does a society built on abundance confront its sudden, terrifying absence? The threat was not a dramatic invasion with armies at the gates, but a slow, silent siege by the sky itself. Fear turned to desperation as famine crept from the countryside into the cities. Whispers of unrest grew louder. The social order that had held for centuries was beginning to fracture under the weight of hunger and thirst. It was in this atmosphere of impending collapse, with the kingdom balanced on a razor's edge, that a solution had to be found. The old ways had failed. Survival demanded something entirely new, a leap of ingenuity born from absolute necessity. This was the desperate race against time that makes the discovery of the cracked statue so extraordinary. It was not merely an archaeological curiosity, but the key to understanding how a civilization cheated its own extinction. The solution would not be found in the open air, but in the darkness beneath the earth. Decades after the kingdom's crisis had faded into legend, a simple accident in a museum storage room brought its secret back to light. A researcher was cataloging artifacts, moving a heavy stone statue of a long-forgotten official, when a pre-existing crack in the torso widened slightly. A flake of stone fell away. Instead of a rough, broken interior, the researcher saw the unexpected glint of precise, deliberate carving. The outside of the statue was worn and featureless, but its hidden heart held an intricate pattern of lines, channels, and symbols. It was not a map of roads or cities, but something far more specific. It looked like the schematic for a machine, or more accurately, a network. This was not a decoration. It was a set of instructions carved in secret, a three-dimensional diagram preserved within a seemingly mundane object. The statue was no longer just a piece of art. It was a classified document from a civilization fighting for its life. Why hide such vital knowledge inside a statue? Perhaps it was a form of security, a way to protect the kingdom's most valuable secret from falling into the wrong hands, or simply from being lost to time. The discovery forced historians to reconsider the entire period. They had to stop looking for grand temples and start searching for the subtle, hidden engineering that truly saved the kingdom. The carvings inside the statue were a language of survival. Under the magnifying glass, the seemingly chaotic lines resolved into a coherent system. Epigraphers, experts in ancient writing, quickly identified recurring symbols that matched those found on clay tablets dealing with irrigation and wells. A zigzag line represented a flowing channel. A series of concentric circles denoted a spring or a well. These were not abstract artistic choices. they were the technical schematics of a hydraulic engineer. The short phrases carved beside these symbols were even more revealing. One inscription read, "The path of the life-giver." Another spoke of the hidden veins of the earth. The meaning was unmistakable. This was a guide to a secret water supply. This discovery cast the statue's exterior in a completely new light. The statue depicted a minor deity associated with rivers and rainfall, a common enough subject for the time. But now that religious imagery felt like a clever disguise. The public face of the statue was one of faith, a tribute to a god who controlled the rains. Its hidden interior, however, was a manual of practical defiance. It revealed a society that was not just praying for water, they were actively stealing it from the earth itself. Their spiritual beliefs and their survival technology were not separate, they were two sides of the same coin. The deity on the outside represented the hope, while the map on the inside represented the action. This dual meaning suggested a profound connection between their worldview and their engineering prowess, a connection that would become the central mystery of the entire endeavor. Why go to such lengths to hide a practical solution inside a religious object? The answer would lead researchers to the most daring phase of the entire project. The physical search for the system the map promised was real. The stone itself began to speak. While scholars deciphered the carvings, geologists took a sample from the statue's broken edge. They were not looking for inscriptions, but for a chemical fingerprint, a unique signature locked within the limestone. Every quarry has a distinct mineral composition, a hidden identity card formed over millions of years. The analysis revealed a precise match to a single, remote quarry located many miles from the kingdom's heartland. On the surface, this seemed like a logistical oddity. Why haul such an enormous, heavy block of stone from such a distant site when closer quarries were available? The answer lay in the quarry's geography. This particular location was famous, even in ancient times, for being a water-rich zone, a place where natural springs bubbled up from vast underground aquifers. The choice of stone was not a matter of convenience, it was a profound statement. The statue was crafted from the very essence of a water source. Its physical material was a direct link to the life-giving resource it secretly documented. Think of it as a piece of the solution embedded into the instruction manual. The map inside showed the system's design, while the stone itself pointed toward the system's origin. This geochemical clue acted like a compass needle, swinging away from the arid capital and pointing decisively toward the lush, spring-fed highlands. It gave field archaeologists a critical starting point, transforming a vast, unknown territory into a specific, searchable area. The hunt for the physical evidence of the water system was no longer a shot in the dark. It was now a targeted mission guided by the statue's own substance. Armed with a literal map and a geological compass, archaeologists descended once more upon the sun-baked ruins of the capital. This was no longer a routine excavation. It was a forensic investigation. They walked the same ground they had walked for years, but now they were looking for a ghost, the spectral imprint of a network designed to be invisible. Their eyes were trained to spot the foundations of palaces and temples, but now they searched for subtler clues, for slight depressions in the earth, for unusual alignments of stones that might hint at something buried deep below. The theoretical schematic from the statue needed a physical body, and they were determined to find its bones. The key tool in this new hunt was ground-penetrating radar, a technology that lets you see into the earth without lifting a shovel. It sends pulses of energy downward, which bounce back differently depending on what they hit, creating a shadowy ultrasound of the subsurface. As they scanned the area between the old city center and the distant quarry, the radar screens began to tell a new story. Faint linear patterns emerged from the chaotic static, like veins on an X-ray. These were not the blocky shapes of building foundations, but long, thin, continuous lines running in a deliberate path. They were the unmistakable signatures of tunnels or carefully constructed channels. The most compelling evidence was their direction. They ran on a precise, gentle slope from the highlands straight toward the heart of the ancient city. This was the ultimate corroboration. The lines on the radar screen were a perfect match for the channels carved inside the statue. The blueprint was real. The map was not a fantasy or a religious allegory. It was a functional guide to a real, functioning system. This discovery transformed the entire site from a collection of dead ruins into a living machine, whose most vital organs were hidden safely underground, protected from the sun and from any potential enemies. The kingdom had not just hoped for salvation, it had engineered it with breathtaking precision, burying its greatest achievement to ensure its survival. The ghost of the system now had a name. As the radar images confirmed the physical reality of the tunnels, historians turned back to the dusty archives with a new question. Who was responsible for this masterpiece of survival? Scrolling through clay tablets and fragmented royal decrees from the era of the Great Drought, a name began to emerge with newfound significance: a royal architect and hydrologist named Anatu. Previous translations had mentioned him only in passing, his praises seeming like the standard flattery afforded to court officials. But reread in the context of the drought, the words took on a profound, literal meaning. One text celebrated Anatu for harnessing the mountain's tears. Another credited him with bringing solace to the parched land. These were not just poetic metaphors, they were precise descriptions of an actual hydrological achievement. The timeline was the clincher. Anatu's documented projects, once thought to be minor public works, were all commissioned at the exact peak of the crisis, when the kingdom was at its most desperate. This was no longer a story about anonymous collective ingenuity. It was the story of one person's genius answering a civilization's cry for help. The cracked statue then becomes something deeply personal. It was likely a commemoration of Anatu's triumph, a tribute hidden in plain sight. The public saw a religious icon, but the initiated knew it held the blueprint for his life's work. This connection transforms the entire mystery. We are no longer looking at a cold, mechanical system, but at the legacy of a leader who stared down an existential threat and refused to surrender. Imagine the pressure he must have faced, the weight of every thirsty citizen resting on his ability to command gravity and stone. His leadership under that pressure did not just save a kingdom, it created a legend, one that was quietly carved into stone to guide future generations should the skies ever fail again. Anatu's genius was not in inventing water, but in mastering its most fundamental rule. The entire system operated on a single, elegant principle: gravity. It was a technology that required no fuel, no moving parts, and no labor beyond its initial construction, a self-sustaining river flowing silently underground. The water's journey began in natural springs high in the distant mountains, at an elevation hundreds of feet above the thirsty capital. From that high point, the engineers carved a channel with an almost imperceptible downward slope, a gradient so slight it would be invisible to the naked eye, yet perfect for a slow, steady flow. This gentle descent was the system's silent engine. Over a distance of many miles, gravity did all the work, patiently pulling the water from its source to its destination without a single pump or slave turning a wheel. How did they achieve such precision with only simple tools? They likely used a version of a water level, a long tube filled with water that reveals a true horizontal line, allowing them to chart a perfectly consistent drop across vast and uneven terrain. Any miscalculation, a slope too steep or too flat, and the system would have failed, the water either rushing violently and eroding the tunnels or stagnating into a polluted pond. Their success lay in this mathematical exactness, a testament to an empirical understanding of physics that was generations ahead of its time. But moving the water was only half the challenge. They also had to keep it clean and manageable. Along the route, they constructed clever innovations like settling basins, small underground chambers where the water would slow down, allowing sand and silt to settle to the bottom before the clearer water continued on its path. They even designed subtle flow regulators, narrow constrictions in the channel that controlled the water's speed and pressure, preventing surges that could damage the delicate tunnels. This was not just a ditch, it was a carefully calibrated machine built into the landscape, a hidden masterpiece of hydrodynamics that provided a constant, reliable lifeline. The kingdom's survival was secured not by magic, but by a profound and practical command of a natural force, a lesson in humility and ingenuity that flowed as steadily as the water itself. But how do you build a river? The sheer physical challenge of carving a permanent watercourse through miles of solid rock and earth is almost beyond comprehension. The workers did not have modern machinery, only bronze chisels, stone hammers, and an immense amount of human strength. Where the terrain allowed, they carved the channels directly into the bedrock, a painstaking process of pounding and scraping that inched forward day by day. In softer ground, where tunnels were necessary to maintain the gradient, the engineering became even more sophisticated. They constructed arched ceilings from precisely cut stone blocks, a design that distributed the weight of the earth above and prevented catastrophic collapses. To make the entire network watertight, they invented a special mortar, a mixture of local clay and lime that created a hard, impermeable seal between the stones. This mortar was their secret weapon, ensuring that not a single precious drop was lost to the thirsty soil along the route. Yet the true marvel was not just the manual labor, but the staggering coordination required to make it all happen. How do you feed and house an army of workers stretched out over many miles? How do you ensure that a team starting from the capital and a team starting from the mountain spring meet in the middle with their tunnels perfectly aligned? This was a logistical puzzle on an epic scale, a testament to a highly organized central authority that could command resources and labor from across the entire kingdom. It was a project that demanded more than just strong backs. It required brilliant minds for planning, surveying, and management. This was not a haphazard ditch dug in desperation. It was a carefully orchestrated public works project that likely defined a generation, a collective effort that channeled the kingdom's fear into a monument of survival. The system's silent flow was powered by more than gravity. It was powered by the unwavering will of an entire civilization united against a common enemy. This ambitious map revealed a path of stunning complexity. The aqueduct did not take a straight, obvious line from the mountains to the city. Instead, it followed a serpentine route, a masterclass in strategic geography. It clung to the sheltered sides of valleys, using the natural contours of the land to shield it from the elements. It dove beneath hills not with brute force, but by finding the most stable geological seams, carefully avoiding zones known for earthquakes or landslides. Every twist and turn was a calculated decision. The engineers were not just moving water, they were protecting it. They understood that a single rockslide or a collapsed tunnel could sever the kingdom's lifeline, dooming the entire project. This was infrastructure designed for permanence, but the path was also a secret. By weaving through unpopulated areas and staying largely underground, the system remained invisible to any rival kingdom or nomadic raider who might be tempted to sabotage it or claim the water for themselves. The water's journey was a covert operation. Seeing the full route mapped out across the modern landscape finally exposed the project's breathtaking scale. The aqueduct stretched for a distance that would have been a multi-day journey on foot, a span that seemed to defy the technological limits of its era. To look at that map is to understand the sheer audacity of the vision. It was not a local fix, it was a territorial claim, an act of civil engineering that bound the distant, water-rich highlands directly to the beating heart of the kingdom. The line on the map represents more than a water pipe. It represents a lifeline drawn with incredible foresight and courage. The water's epic journey did not end at the city walls. After flowing silently for miles, the life-giving stream finally reached its destination, but the final and perhaps most delicate challenge still remained. How do you get this precious resource to every corner of a vast, thirsty capital? The solution was a masterpiece of urban planning. The main tunnel emptied into a massive, central reservoir, an artificial lake carved directly into the bedrock at the city's highest natural point. This was not just a storage tank, it was the beating heart of the entire system. Its elevated position gave the water something invaluable: pressure. From this reservoir, gravity took over once more, pushing the water downward through a carefully calibrated network of smaller pipes made from fired clay and hollowed stone. These smaller channels branched out like arteries, carrying the water to public fountains in every neighborhood, to the royal gardens, and to the vast agricultural terraces that fed the population. This design ensured an equitable distribution that was absolutely critical to the kingdom's survival. The ruling class did not hoard the water for their palaces alone. By ensuring that common citizens had reliable access to clean water at public fountains, the system prevented the social unrest that famine and thirst inevitably breed. It was a sophisticated socio-technological solution, recognizing that a kingdom is not saved by engineering alone, but by fairness. The public fountains became more than just water sources. They were hubs of community life, symbols of a shared fortune, and a daily reminder that the entire society was in this struggle together. This equitable approach turned a technological triumph into a social contract, binding the people to their leaders through the most fundamental resource of all. The system's true genius was not just in conquering geography, but in understanding human nature. The scientific evidence for the kingdom's desperation is etched not in stone, but in ice and wood. Paleoclimatologists, scientists who study ancient climates, have pieced together the environmental catastrophe from unlikely archives. Deep within ice cores drilled from distant glaciers, they found layers of dust and isotopes that tell a story of a sky that held back its rain for generations. Sediment layers from dried-up lake beds confirm a landscape slowly baking under a relentless sun, but the most chillingly precise record comes from ancient tree rings. Each narrow ring represents a single year of stunted growth, a direct result of insufficient water. The data reveals not just a bad season or even a few tough years, but a devastating mega-drought spanning decades. This was not a temporary hardship, it was a permanent shift in the very conditions that had allowed the civilization to flourish. Traditional agriculture, dependent on seasonal rains and river floods, would have been utterly impossible. The fields that once fed a nation would have become barren dust bowls. This climatic data provides the undeniable why. It transforms the water system from an impressive public works project into a last-ditch effort for survival. The kingdom was not merely improving its infrastructure, it was engineering a solution to an existential threat. The cracked statue, then, is the record of their specific answer. While their world was dying above ground, they tapped into a deeper, more reliable source of life. In a stunning twist, the very cause of their collapse, the drought, became the catalyst for an innovation so profound it may have allowed them to thrive. By mastering the underground water, they turned their greatest vulnerability into an unassailable strength, creating a resource so secure it was immune to the failures of the sky. This is the ultimate lesson of the statue, that the most dire crises can force the most brilliant adaptations. The silent, steady flow of water did more than quench thirst, it rewrote the kingdom's destiny. With the aqueduct secure, the paralyzing fear of famine simply vanished. Instead of facing chaotic mass migrations, with families abandoning their homes in a desperate search for food, the kingdom held firm. Its population remained in place, its social fabric intact. This stability was the foundation for everything that followed. Farmers, once staring at barren fields, could now tend to carefully irrigated plots that produced reliable harvests year after year. The kingdom's granaries, which had been emptying toward disaster, began to fill once more. This agricultural revival meant trade did not collapse. Merchants continued to bring goods, and artisans continued their crafts, creating an unbroken chain of economic activity that shielded the society from the economic shockwaves that would have otherwise shattered it. This newfound security created a surplus of something even more valuable than water: human energy. When a society is locked in a daily struggle for survival, all its creativity and labor are consumed by that single goal. But with the basic need for water met, the kingdom's collective mind was freed. Resources and skilled labor could be diverted from crisis management to grander pursuits. This is when the kingdom entered its most celebrated era, a golden age of culture and learning. Architects designed breathtaking temples and monuments not as fortifications against an enemy, but as expressions of faith and power. Scholars and scribes, no longer preoccupied with recording shortages, could advance astronomy, mathematics, and law. Artists created works of stunning beauty, their art reflecting a society confident in its future rather than fearful of its end. The water system was the invisible engine of this renaissance. It was the stability that allowed ambition to flourish. Ultimately, the network of channels was far more than an engineering marvel. It was the very backbone of civilization itself. It transformed a crisis that should have been an epitaph into a chapter of unprecedented growth. The kingdom's lasting legacy, the grand buildings and advanced culture we still admire today, stands as a monument not to a lucky break in the weather, but to a deliberate, brilliant choice to harness the earth and save itself. This choice echoes a profound truth about human resilience, that our greatest cultural achievements often spring from our most successful solutions to survival. This kingdom's hidden river was not an isolated miracle of engineering. Across the ancient world, from the deserts of Persia to the hills of Rome, human civilizations were grappling with the same fundamental problem: how to move water across great distances. The most famous of these solutions are the magnificent aqueducts of the Roman Empire. These were bold, towering statements of power, built of stone and concrete, marching across valleys on immense arches for all to see. Their grandeur was their purpose, a public demonstration of Roman engineering might and imperial control over nature. In stark contrast, the system revealed by the cracked statue was an exercise in invisibility. Where Rome built monuments, this kingdom built a secret. Its genius was not in its visibility, but in its concealment, a defensive strategy born from a more desperate and vulnerable position. A closer parallel can be found with the Persian qanats, ancient underground tunnels that tapped into mountain aquifers. Both systems relied on the same elegant, gravity-fed principle, and both understood the value of hiding water from the evaporating sun. Yet here too, a critical difference emerges. The Persian qanats were often local affairs, brilliant feats of community engineering designed to irrigate a specific village or a series of fields. The network that saved the kingdom, however, was a project of an entirely different scale and ambition. It was not designed for a village, but for a sprawling capital city and its vast agricultural support system. It was a centralized, state-level undertaking that formed the single, critical lifeline for an entire civilization on the brink. What makes this discovery so profound is that it appears to be an independent invention. There is no evidence of cultural contact or shared knowledge with the builders of the Persian Khanats or the Roman aqueducts. This was not a technology that was borrowed or copied. Instead, it represents a separate branch on the great tree of human innovation. Faced with an identical environmental threat, a catastrophic drought, engineers on opposite sides of the world arrived at a similar, brilliant conclusion: go underground. This pattern reveals something fundamental about our species. When survival is at stake, human ingenuity can converge on the same elegant solutions, even across vast divides of culture and geography. The kingdom's achievement stands not in isolation, but as a powerful testament to the universal human drive to overcome, to adapt, and to secure a future against all odds. So why hide this brilliant solution inside a religious statue? The answer seems to lie in a powerful duality of purpose. This object was likely both a monument and a manual. As a commemoration, its public face honored the deity associated with water, a symbol of gratitude for divine providence. But for those in the know, its hollow core was a tribute to human genius, a permanent record of the engineer Anatu's triumph over nature. The internal map was a hidden trophy, celebrating the practical intellect that saved the kingdom when prayer alone was not enough. Yet this theory of celebration is balanced by one of pure necessity. The statue may have been a functional archive, a three-dimensional blueprint designed to outlast papyrus or clay tablets. Imagine a catastrophic fire or the slow decay of a royal library. Vital knowledge could be lost in a single generation, but a durable stone statue, especially one depicting a revered figure, would likely be preserved through war, famine, and the rise and fall of dynasties. It was a failsafe. By encoding the system's design within an object of cultural and spiritual value, the kingdom ensured that the knowledge of its own salvation would survive almost any disaster. The religious exterior acted as a perfect camouflage, protecting this technical treasure from enemies who might see it as a strategic target to destroy. This ingenious fusion of faith and function reveals a society that understood its survival depended on both its beliefs and its practical wisdom, seamlessly woven together into a single, unassuming stone figure. The cracked statue's secret remained locked in stone for centuries, a testament to the limits of traditional archaeology. A researcher in the past, armed with only a brush and a magnifying glass, might have dismissed the internal fissure as simple damage. The true revelation belongs to our own time, powered by a suite of non-invasive technologies that act as a second sight for historians. Three-dimensional laser scanning was the first key. By bathing the statue's interior with millions of precise light points, it created a perfect digital replica, allowing experts to manipulate and examine the carved channels from every angle on a screen. They could highlight subtle grooves invisible to the naked eye and measure depths with microscopic accuracy, transforming a faint, confusing pattern into a clear, navigable map. This digital blueprint then needed a real-world counterpart. That is where ground-penetrating radar entered the story, sending its pulses into the earth to trace the ghostly outlines of the tunnels exactly where the map promised they would be. Meanwhile, light detection and ranging, or LiDAR, scanned the vast landscape from the air, using lasers to strip away modern vegetation and reveal the ancient, subtle pathways and settlements that were integral to the system's route. Finally, isotopic analysis provided the chemical testimony, matching the statue's stone to its source quarry with the certainty of a fingerprint. Each technology answered a different question, but together they formed an irrefutable chain of evidence. This case is a powerful example of how 21st century tools are not just assisting archaeology, they are fundamentally rewriting it. They allow us to interrogate the past without causing destruction, to see through solid rock and dense soil, granting us a clarity that previous generations could only dream of. Every time a new technology is applied to an old mystery, we are essentially opening a new chapter in a book we thought we had already finished reading. Of course, scholars rarely reach a perfect consensus on a discovery of this magnitude. The very idea that a statue's hidden carvings form a precise engineering map is not accepted by everyone. A vocal minority of researchers maintain that the intricate lines are purely symbolic, perhaps representing spiritual concepts of water flow or the underworld, with no practical application. They suggest that reading them as a technical schematic is an act of modern projection, imposing our own engineering mindset onto an ancient artistic tradition. Another intriguing alternative is that the underground channels were not for delivering fresh water, but for carrying it away. Could this vast network have been an elaborate drainage system designed to prevent flooding in the rare event of a torrential downpour? Or perhaps the channels served a ritual function, guiding sacred waters for ceremonial purposes rather than public consumption. These debates are not signs of failure, but are the essential engine of scientific progress. Each counterargument forces the main theory to defend itself with stronger evidence, to look for new clues that can settle the dispute. For instance, if the system was for drainage, why does the map lead from a water-rich area to a parched city? If the carvings are purely symbolic, why do they match the ground-penetrating radar images with such exacting precision? This rigorous back and forth is what separates a compelling story from a substantiated historical fact. It reminds us that the past rarely offers a single, simple truth. Instead, it presents us with a complex puzzle, and the process of debating where each piece fits is how we get closer to a complete picture, even if that picture remains just beyond our full view. Even the most brilliant solution can become a victim of its own success. For generations, the hidden water system was the kingdom's beating heart, but no civilization remains static forever. The very stability it provided created the conditions for its eventual neglect. Imagine a society that has enjoyed reliable water for a century. The grandparents who endured the Great Drought are gone, and their stories of thirst and desperation have softened into vague legends. The intricate network of tunnels performing its duty flawlessly out of sight simply faded from daily consciousness. It became a utility as unremarkable as the air they breathed. This long piece was the first crack in the system's foundation, not in the stone, but in the collective memory of the people it served. When a solution works perfectly, we stop thinking about the problem it solved. The meticulous maintenance required to keep the channels clear, once a sacred civic duty, likely began to seem like an unnecessary expense. Why pour resources into a dark hole in the ground when the water always flows? This gradual complacency made the entire kingdom vulnerable. Then came the earthquake. Geological records show a significant seismic event around the time the city's fortunes began to wane. Such a tremor would have been catastrophic for the delicate, gravity-fed gradient. It would have shifted bedrock, collapsed critical sections of tunnel, and misaligned the precise slopes that were the system's silent engine. Repairing such damage would have required the same massive coordination and hydrological expertise that built it, but that specialized knowledge had perhaps already been lost. The kingdom no longer had an Anatu. Without a clear understanding of the system's original blueprint, any repair attempt would have been a blind guess, likely causing more harm than good. The earthquake did not just break the pipes, it broke the chain of knowledge. At the same time, the world was changing around them. New trade routes emerged, bypassing the kingdom and diminishing its economic power. With less wealth flowing into the city, funding large-scale public works became impossible. The priorities shifted from grand infrastructure to immediate survival. Perhaps a period of unusually good rainfall returned, making the colossal effort of restoring the underground river seem pointless. Why dig in the dark when the sky provides for free? So slowly the tunnels silted up. The steady flow that had saved a civilization dwindled to a trickle and then to silence. The hidden veins of the earth, once so carefully mapped, were clogged and forgotten. The kingdom's greatest achievement was buried not by enemies but by time, shifting priorities, and the cruel irony of its own flawless performance. Its success made it invisible and then, ultimately, lost. Long after the last stone of the aqueduct was covered by earth, the memory of its miracle refused to die. The people who lived in the region for generations may have forgotten the name Anatu and the science of gradients, but they held onto the wonder. Their oral traditions became the new guardians of the past, preserving the story in the only way they knew how, through myth. Folktales spoke of a benevolent spirit who lived beneath the mountains, guarding a secret river that could be summoned only by a pure-hearted king in a time of greatest need. Another legend told of a great hero who journeyed into the underworld to bargain with the earth itself for a single, endless spring. For centuries, historians dismissed these as charming fantasies, symbolic tales with no basis in fact. But the discovery of the cracked statue forces us to listen to these stories with new ears. What if the spirit under the mountain was not a deity, but the hidden aquifer? What if the pure-hearted king was the visionary architect who unlocked it? The hero's journey to the underworld might be a poetic retelling of the dangerous, back-breaking work of tunneling deep into the earth. These legends are not mere fiction, they are a form of historical compression, where complex events are simplified and personified over countless retellings. The line between a brilliant engineer and a mythical hero begins to blur. The story of a magical spring that saved the kingdom is in essence a true story, stripped of its technical details and recast in the language of magic and destiny. This transformation from technology to myth reveals a profound truth about how civilizations remember. When a society loses the blueprints, it holds onto the feeling, the awe, and the gratitude. The legend becomes a cultural artifact, a fossilized imprint of a real, world-altering achievement. It is a reminder that the most enduring legacy of a great invention may not be the machine itself, but the story it inspires. The silence of that ancient aqueduct speaks directly to the crises we face today. As climate change intensifies, creating unprecedented droughts and water shortages, the kingdom's forgotten system offers a masterclass in sustainable design. Their solution was not about overpowering nature with massive pumps and energy-hungry plants, but about intelligently cooperating with it. They understood that the most reliable water source was not the unpredictable sky, but the stable, filtered reservoirs deep within the earth. This principle of sustainable sourcing is more critical now than ever, as overpumping of groundwater depletes aquifers faster than they can recharge. The kingdom did not mine their water, they managed it, tapping a renewable source without exhausting it. This long-term perspective stands in stark contrast to the short-term fixes that often dominate modern policy, where the immediate cost of a project can overshadow its century-long benefits. The kingdom built for permanence, and their system lasted for generations because of that foresight. Their engineers were masters of efficiency, letting gravity do all the work. In a world grappling with the energy demands of modern life, the idea of a massive water distribution network that requires zero electricity is not just a historical curiosity, it is a radical inspiration. Imagine a system that delivers a vital resource without burning a single fossil fuel, without contributing to the very atmospheric changes that are creating the water crisis in the first place. This elegant, low-energy approach is a powerful reminder that complexity is not always a sign of progress. Sometimes, the most advanced solution is also the simplest. The kingdom's decentralized storage network is another lesson in resilience. Instead of one massive, vulnerable reservoir, they built a distributed system with a central hub and many neighborhood fountains. If one part of the network failed or was damaged, the entire city did not lose its water supply. This built-in redundancy is a core principle of modern disaster preparedness, yet it was engineered thousands of years ago. They planned for failure, understanding that a system must be able to withstand shocks. Modern engineers are now looking back to these ancient ideas, championing what is known as green infrastructure. This means replacing concrete canals with restored wetlands that naturally filter water, or designing landscapes that capture rainwater where it falls, allowing it to seep back into the ground rather than rushing away. It is a philosophy of working with the natural topography, just as the kingdom's builders did when they traced their gentle, gravity-fed path through the hills. The cracked statue, then, is more than a record of the past. It is a challenge to our present. It asks us whether our own solutions are designed for the next election cycle or for the next millennium. It suggests that the wisdom to navigate our current challenges might not lie in inventing something entirely new, but in remembering something profoundly old, a humble respect for the forces of nature and the cleverness to harness them without breaking them. The map inside the statue is remarkably detailed, yet it still holds its secrets. Archaeologists have confirmed the main channel's path, but the search for its ultimate origin point continues. Where exactly did the engineers tap into the mountain aquifer? Finding that primary spring source is the next great prize, a discovery that would reveal the precise hydrological genius behind the entire operation. Equally mysterious is the location of the project's command center. A system of this scale required a permanent headquarters, a place where surveyors, engineers, and administrators coordinated their efforts. Was it a modest building near the quarry or a grand hall within the capital? Unearthing this base of operations would provide a treasure trove of information, from daily work logs to the personal tools of the architects themselves. New questions arise with every answered mystery. How did they ensure the water remained pure over such a long distance? There must have been a method for regular testing, perhaps at the public fountains, to guard against contamination. And did this lifeline serve only the capital, or were there smaller, undiscovered branch lines diverting water to outlying villages and fortresses? Each of these questions represents a new thread to pull in the vast tapestry of this ancient achievement. The investigation is far from over. It is being propelled forward by ever more sensitive technologies. Advanced sonar can now map underwater cave systems that might hold the original spring. Drones equipped with thermal cameras can detect subtle temperature differences in the soil, hinting at hidden, water-filled cavities below. This continuous cycle of discovery and inquiry proves that history is not a closed book. It is a living, breathing field of study where a single cracked statue can ignite a century of investigation. Every season of digging, every new scan of the landscape, adds another piece to an unfinished puzzle. The story of this kingdom and its hidden river is still being written, one careful excavation at a time. This single statue shatters the comfortable timeline of technological progress we have long accepted. The sophistication on display here was not a happy accident or a simple ditch dug in desperation. It reveals a society with a formal, systematic understanding of sciences we tend to associate with later empires. Their grasp of geology allowed them to identify a specific aquifer and understand the rock strata through which they would tunnel. Their civil engineering prowess is evident in the precise gradients, the arched tunnels, and the watertight mortar, all calculated without modern mathematics. And the project management, the ability to coordinate labor and resources across a vast distance for years, speaks to a highly organized administrative state. This was not a primitive culture, it was a peer to the great civilizations of its day, solving a problem of a scale and complexity that would challenge many modern engineers. This discovery actively challenges a historical narrative that has often placed Mediterranean and European cultures at the apex of ancient innovation. For a long time, major technological leaps were measured against a Greco-Roman standard, with other cultures viewed as beneficiaries or imitators. The kingdom's water system demolishes that assumption. It was an independent, homegrown solution to a local existential threat. Innovation did not radiate outward from a single center. It sparked simultaneously wherever human ingenuity was pressed to its limits by necessity. This should prompt a profound shift in how we examine the archaeological record. If a civilization we considered peripheral was capable of this, what other hidden marvels lie buried beneath the sands or jungles, waiting for us to look past our own biases and see the evidence for what it is? The lesson of the cracked statue is a call to re-examine every overlooked artifact, every faded inscription, with fresh eyes and the humility to recognize that ancient genius wore many different faces. The true scale of this project is measured not in miles of tunnel, but in the countless hands that carved it. While history remembers the architect Anatu, the silent army of laborers who turned his vision into reality remain almost entirely anonymous. Their story is written not on clay tablets, but in the sheer physicality of the tunnels themselves. The chisel marks that groove the walls are their only signature, each strike a testament to a person whose name is lost to time. Who were these people? They were not slaves driven by a whip, but more likely a mix of skilled stonemasons and farmers conscripted through a system known as corvée labor, a form of tax paid not in grain or gold, but in work. During the off-seasons when fields lay fallow, these farmers would have traded their plows for pickaxes, contributing their strength to a project that promised their families survival. Alongside them worked guilds of professional miners and stoneworkers, the experts who understood how to shape an arch or mix the perfect ceiling mortar. This was a society mobilizing its entire workforce, from the strongest back to the most specialized mind. Feeding and housing this dispersed army was a logistical nightmare that rivals the engineering itself. Camps would have sprung up along the entire route, temporary villages buzzing with activity. How do you provide bread for thousands of workers stretched across dozens of miles? Supply caravans must have been a constant sight on the trails, a lifeline carrying food, water, and tools from the still-functioning heartlands to the remote work sites. The organization required was staggering. Work crews had to be perfectly synchronized. A team starting from the mountains and a team starting from the city had to meet in the middle with their tunnels aligning within inches. A single miscalculation in direction or gradient would mean months of wasted effort. This precision hints at a highly disciplined and motivated workforce, united by a shared, urgent purpose. They were not just building a water channel, they were digging a trench for their own future. The project's success hinged on this collective spirit, on every individual understanding that their personal sacrifice was a direct contribution to the salvation of their entire world. This human collaboration was the invisible mortar that held the entire endeavor together, a force as powerful as the gravity that would one day flow through the channels they carved. These digital reconstructions transform abstract lines on a map into a living, breathing world. We can now witness the system's heartbeat, watching as clear, cool water bubbles up from a hidden mountain spring. The animation begins at this source, a place the ancient engineers found and harnessed, showing the water's first entry into the carefully carved channel. From there, the virtual camera follows the water's journey, flowing with it as it begins its long, silent descent toward the city. We see it gliding through tunnels deep underground, a steady, unseen river moving with purposeful grace. The reconstructions make the gentle slope tangible, illustrating how a drop of only a few inches over a mile could create a current strong enough to travel vast distances, yet calm enough to prevent erosion. It is a lesson in physics rendered in beautiful, flowing motion. We can fly alongside the water as it passes through a settling basin, pausing briefly as silt drifts to the bottom, ensuring its clarity before it continues. The visualization makes the system's cleverness immediate. We see how the channel navigates a steep valley not with a towering bridge, but by diving underneath, using the earth itself as a shield. The journey culminates in the city's central reservoir, where the water finally emerges from darkness into a vast, open cistern. From this high point, the animation then branches out, tracing the water's path through the smaller clay pipes that carried it to public fountains and irrigated fields, demonstrating how a single source sustained an entire metropolis. This is more than a simple model, it is a time machine. It allows us to stand on a parched street in the ancient capital and finally understand where the life-giving water actually came from, appreciating the monumental effort hidden beyond the horizon. By making the invisible visible, these digital tools close the gap between our modern minds and ancient ingenuity, letting us feel the scale of the achievement not as a historical fact, but as a visceral experience. That broken statue was more than a broken piece of art. It was a key that unlocked a forgotten chapter of human resilience. It revealed a sophisticated water system that literally saved a kingdom, a testament to ancient ingenuity in the face of environmental disaster. This story connects us to the past, reminding us of the timeless challenges of survival and the power of innovative thinking. It encourages us to look closer at the artifacts around us, for they may hold secrets waiting to be rediscovered. Let this be a lesson in looking beyond the surface, because sometimes the most profound truths are hidden in the cracks.